Have you ever met a beautiful person, perhaps the person of your dreams, developed a relationship with them based on trust and the mutual desire for freedom, only for that person to actually be a squid freak in disguise? And most of what they said to you might have been a lie? Yeah, it's not a fun thing to go through. Hi, my name is Mel, and I'm starting a Victims of the Emperor support group.
They say that home is where a person can be their truest selves.
Bro!
Without guile, without pretense.
What is this? Look, I'll be the first to acknowledge that I likely have an unfair bias against the Emperor in Baldur's Gate 3. And it's not because he's a mind flayer. I love Omeluum. I called Omeluum baby girl the other day. That's how you know it's serious. It's just the way that the Emperor treats the player just really grinds my gears. However, the Emperor is notably not as evil as he could be. So that got me thinking, is the Emperor really that bad, or am I just projecting onto him from past negative experiences? So today, I'd like to take a look at his character and unpack the ways in which he interacts with the player character. But due to the nature of interacting with the Emperor, we'll mostly be focusing on what happens when you are not super gung-ho on consuming every tadpole you come across. People who consume the astral tadpole on the very first opportunity will have a different experience with the Emperor, mostly in Act 3. Oh, yeah, in case it doesn't go without saying, this video will contain some big spoilers for Baldur's Gate 3, so if you have not finished the game, consider yourself warned. So, who is the Emperor? The basics of his character is that he was an adventurer who had been turned into a mind flayer at some point in the past, and now he's gained the ability to think for himself, and he's just looking for a way to survive and maintain his independence. When you look at it that way, he's not all that different from us or our darling companions, just as he claims. But is he really just like you? When you first meet the Emperor, he is disguised as a dream guardian of your own design, and it feels extra insidious when you make a feminine character only for it to turn out to be a lying man. But I don't think that's intentional characterization here, so I'm not going to be holding that against him in this video. But aside from the switcheroo plot twist, there's a lot more to how the Emperor treats the player. The Dream Guardian that the Emperor first presents himself as is a custom-made character that I believe most of us made way too attractive for no reason, but I do think it is worth noting that in earlier versions of the game, the player was directly prompted to make a person that they find attractive, and many players, even knowing the plot twist, will make the Dream Guardian a character that holds some sort of significance for the character of their tab or Dark Urge or whatever you're playing as. At first, the Dream Guardian is your knight in shining armor, and when you initially meet him, he shows you all the ways in which he has saved you thus far, presenting himself as someone you need to depend on, someone with your best interest at heart, someone you cannot live without. And yes, to some extent, that is true. The Emperor is the one who is saving you and your companions from turning into mind flayers, although I'm not entirely sure if I trust him when he directly says that he has stopped your order to transform many times, but that does not change the fact that he is actually the reason you have maintained your ability to think for yourself despite the tadpole lodged in your brain. We see this as an intentional decision on his part when you have to convince him to extend that same mercy to Minsk in Act 3. It's not just proximity to the Astral Prism and in turn the Emperor that protects you, but his conscious choice to grant you free will. He is gaining the player's favor by creating an environment where they will feel dependent on him, or maybe even indebted in a way. Mix in a bit of camaraderie and sympathy by presenting himself as an adventurer just like you who's been fighting for their freedom, and you've got yourself the ideal hero in need of your help. You just need to follow his advice and use the tools you have gained to have the power to help, becoming more useful to his cause. The first thing that the Emperor pushes the player to do is consume more tadpoles to gain power. It's presented as a necessary act of preservation. Consume these tadpoles and gain the power to defend yourself and fight for your freedom. And he's patient with you. Well, kind of. One of these days...
to be rid of it. Understandable. But you're looking for solutions in the wrong places.
In the dream cutscenes, he's more patient, but when you biff an attack that's not an Ilithid power in your next battle, he'll interject, saying that won't work and you must try something else, pushing you towards embracing your Ilithid powers. And might I add, the main theme of Baldur's Gate 3 is the cycles of abuse, power, and tyranny. So maybe you can see where I'm going with this already. In your dreams, though, the Dream Guardian takes on a more understanding approach, leveling with you and appearing to be patient while you grapple with making this decision to essentially infect yourself more, expressing that you're just not ready yet. And that's fine, but you should still come around eventually. The first time the player utilizes power granted by the tadpole, the narrator does describe this sensation of something biting into your brain and taking something that you'll never be able to get back, seemingly implying that the player loses aspects of themselves or their own mind to the tadpole the more they engage with the Ilithid powers. And also, when you consume more tadpoles and gain more Ilithid powers, the parts of your brain grays out, and it really looks like your mind is slowly dying. You're losing yourself. The narrator and the design of the tadpole powers menu tells me that consuming the tadpoles and relying on their power is a very bad idea, or at the very least, a decision that requires sacrifice. So it is understandable that the player character may be hesitant to indulge in such power. But here's the Dream Guardian. Ever enticing, seemingly trustworthy with our best interest at heart, pushing for the player to make that sacrifice. A few of your companions will also be swept up into the Dream Visitor's words. Astarion willing to give it a try, Shadowheart and Gale are interested in the possibilities but are still utilizing caution. But the rest, Karlach, Lae'zel, and Will, are firmly of the belief that they cannot trust the Dream Visitor on this. Lae'zel is the most firm, considering she does have more knowledge on mind flayers and the dangers of their tadpoles and the power that comes with it. So she seems like a good source. That's 3 people against 2 on the fence and 1 willing to give it a shot. And that 1 is a bit power hungry himself and also not great at planning ahead. Everything in this game is telling us that listening to the Dream Guardian is a terrible idea, and yet many of us listen. Many of us trust them. Is it the pretty privilege that we granted them, the convincing performance, the knight in shining armor trope working against us? Part of me feels that appearing to the player in a dream is part of this facade. I can't speak for everyone, but I know that I am a lot more likely to trust something that came to me in a dream than I am a stranger in real life. Especially if said stranger is in direct opposition to Lae'zel, the person I trust more than anyone to keep me in check when it comes to bad ideas, especially when it comes to Ilithid things. I trust this Dream Visitor though, because to me, messages presented in a dream feel like an inherently sacred and trustworthy source. And we see at the end of Act 2 and at certain points of Act 3 that the Dream Guardian, or the Emperor, can leave the Astral Prism and speak with us when the presence of the Absolute is not as strong. But coming to us in dreams allows for a bit of distance and mystery on the Emperor's part. It allows for the Dream Guardian to feel more like a powerful being, Someone fighting a fight far from where we are physically, but still able to protect us. Someone who has the experience and the power to know the best thing for us to do. Someone we should follow without any question. As the game goes on, if you don't consume a single tadpole, refusing to utilize that power, the Dream Guardian will still push for you to consider it, making arguments on how you really need to do that to reach your full potential. Your choices and your agency are not respected here. However, if you do give in to what the Dream Guardian is asking, you're met with praise. Comforting, reassuring, genuine praise. Reinforcement that you should continue to listen to the Dream Guardian.
I see you've been using the powers the tadpole gives you. Good.
This all comes to a head, though, when you and the gang go to the creche. You're put in a position where you must fight for your lives, invoking the wrath of Vlaakith, or step into the Astral Prism to slay your Dream Guardian. Once inside, you meet one-on-one with the Guardian, and they express disappointment in you being there. But you can get some answers. They'll explain a bit more about what's going on, but they'll still leave out some pretty big details that you find out much later in the game. Yes, they know something that'll bring Vlaakith's demise. Yes, they utilize a power they stole to protect you. But what do they know? What is this power? It's left a mystery for now because that's information that'll make the Dream Guardian look less like a noble hero. The Guardian can hear your thoughts though. They say as much. They know that you may not trust them, and they know that you were warned about being deceived by them. In an effort to showcase their sincerity, the Guardian will then offer up their blade, kneeling down, presenting themselves on a platter. They want freedom. They want you to have your freedom. The Guardian has been on your side since the beginning. This is an action that is done to gain your trust. It declaws the Guardian, showing vulnerability and placing their lives into the player's hands. It's also a little bit of a guilt trip as well, making you feel guilty for distrusting them or believing Vlaakith for just a moment. You can choose to spare them, strengthening your bond, or you can choose to kill them. If you take their sword and kill them, the Guardian says that they really thought you wouldn't do that. Again, more guilt tripping. And the two of you could have been so much more. A moment of guilt sets in as you realize you've betrayed someone who put their trust in you. But that's quickly swept away as the Dream Guardian poofs and suddenly reappears totally fine. Except this time, you are the one who cannot be trusted. Which, yeah, makes sense. You did attempt to murder them, but it is reinforced that your survival depends on the Guardian's survival. They remind you that they are the reason you are not a mind flayer, reestablishing themselves as your savior, the reason you live, but this time with a level of harshness. A level of, I'm doing this for you, so you need to work with me here. Which, yeah, again, does make sense considering you did just attempt to murder them. But what's interesting here is that the Dream Guardian will then go on as if this never happened, more or less. Entering Act 2, the Dream Guardian will start to approach the player with more vulnerability. We'd seen glimpses of vulnerability in Act 1, however in Act 2, the Dream Guardian is a lot more upfront with the player, expressing hardship and exhaustion from what they've been through and how being close to the Absolute is draining them. Invoking feelings of sympathy, and perhaps the player would soon get the chance to help out their protector more directly. There is also the idea that in showing vulnerability, there is an illusion of connection and closeness. The Dream Guardian, no, the Emperor, is exploiting any emotional attachment you may have gained for your Dream Guardian. Yes, I am aware that this could be a genuine display, and maybe it is. I just feel like everything the Dream Guardian and the Emperor does is very calculated. If you had attempted to murder the Dream Guardian prior, you will still get this vulnerability, which is part of why I feel that it is calculated because you have not earned this level of closeness. You haven't earned this proximity, this ability to be vulnerable with one another. But the Guardian does it anyway and expresses that they're glad you came to your senses. Came to your senses.
I trust you've come to your senses.
On the one hand, I do understand that the mutual dependence here is undeniable. You cannot live without them, and they cannot live without you. And it would be senseless to sabotage the thing keeping you alive and in control of yourself. But on the other hand, treating your distrust as a silly little, oh, you weren't thinking clearly and now you're back in my grasp and everything is fine, is a bit sinister to me. But that may be because I have had past partners treat me that way when trying to break up with them, so I am aware of the bias here. After defeating Ketheric at the end of Act 2, you are able to come face to face with your Dream Guardian in the waking world. They materialize next to you and the rest of your party, and the two of you make plans to take down Orin and Gortash, so that your party can take down the Absolute. The Guardian will come to you with answers and explanations as to what you saw and to what's going on, and what you must do next, presenting themselves as incredibly knowledgeable about the threats ahead and a worthy ally. Someone that you definitely need to keep around. On your first night in Baldur's Gate, though, the night between Acts 2 and 3, your Dream Guardian will awaken you, begging you for help as the Githyanki show up in your camp via a portal. Your main goal being to fight past them and go through the portal to help your Dream Guardian. However, when you enter the portal, you learn that the Dream Guardian was in fact a mind flayer all along. Who would have guessed it? The thing pushing you to embrace Ilithid powers was an Ilithid himself, hiding a major aspect of his identity from you for the sake of gaining your trust. To his credit, though, I do believe most people would not be willing to hear a mind flayer out, especially one that pushed for consuming more tadpoles and relying on Ilithid powers. But if he was really concerned with helping us like he claimed, it would have been something we could work past. I mean, I think most players came around to trusting or at least vibing with Omelawum in the Underdark, so much so that we're all busting our asses to save that funky little guy from the Iron Throne. I do believe Omelawum was put in this game as a sort of contrast to what free-thinking mind flayers can be like. They're not all like the Emperor. Some of them are like Omelawum. The Emperor could have been like Omelawum. But I can't entirely judge the Emperor for lying like that, because I understand. But it is the lying in turn with insisting that he's only ever told the truth that makes me trust him even less and makes this whole thing feel like it's worth judging. The Emperor is easily able to prove that he was in fact the Dream Guardian and is able to think for himself, unlike most mind flayers. And if you attempt to detect his thoughts, looking for signs of truth, he will unleash more. But it's a bit passive-aggressive. I do think it's funny that he calls you out for trying to detect his thoughts when he is directly projecting his thoughts into your mind. But it's in a move that feels like retaliation. He overwhelms you with his thoughts and his presence. Not exactly a point against him, though, considering that detecting thoughts is pretty scummy as well on our part, but it is something I felt was worth noting to characterize his personality here. You're then faced with a decision. Trust the Emperor and fight the Gith invasion, or fight everyone with the hopes of freeing Orpheus, who's been trapped and is the thing that the Emperor is exploiting to protect you and your companions from the Absolute. Most people would ally with the Emperor here. Again, he is keeping us safe to some extent, so it makes sense to work with him to subdue Orpheus. If you work with the Emperor, he helps you in fighting the Gith, but if you choose to not ally with him, he will technically not be on your side. But in my fight, when I chose to go against him, he didn't attack me. He focused more on the Gith, and I was put in a situation where I needed to focus on the Gith as well because they were actively killing me. I was hoping to be able to continue fighting once they were taken care of, but as soon as the last Gith died, the Emperor took that as me coming to my senses and went on as if I had allied with him, which feels very similar to what happens when you attempt to murder him for Vlaakith in Act 1. It's an utter disregard for my actual decisions, more or less. Again, this isn't inherently wrong and manipulative, considering that the two of you are quite literally depending on one another for survival, but brushing things to the side paired with everything else the Emperor does, it feels like the Emperor is trying to establish a normal and enforces your allyship by disregarding your deviance from said normal. This line of thought is supported by the fact that he still tries to seduce you, even if you're mean and harsh to him throughout Act 3. Let me back up here a bit. In Act 3, we learn a lot about the Emperor. We get to see glimpses of his humanity and learn about his past before we got mixed up with him, and his past before he was a Mind Flayer. Let me take you through the Emperor timeline. Back when he was a human, or at the very least not a Mind Flayer, the Emperor was an adventurer seeking fortune and excitement. His adventures led him to Moonrise Towers, where he was then infected upon finding a Mind Flayer colony. But he wasn't just any adventurer. He was Baldurin, the literal founder of Baldur's Gate. Not that that's a huge deal in the whole grand scheme of things, but it is a fun detail that would have been cool for him to share with us. However, the biggest thing we learn from the Baldurin reveal is that he was the one who initially killed Ansur, his past partner and the dragon that was supposed to be beneath the city, the very thing Will promised would help us against the Absolute. And I do think it's interesting here, because we don't get like an exact timeline. We know that the Emperor had been a Mind Flayer for quite some time, and he did not have his independence for a lot of that time. But we don't, or at least I didn't quite grasp the timeline between infection, loss of self, and the confrontation with Ansur. But Baldurin had been turned into a Mind Flayer, and he was able to break free from the thrall and retained free will to some extent. However, Ansur was more or less heartbroken to see what had come of Baldurin, and aimed to kill him, put him out of his misery, and keep him from becoming a monster. Or I guess he already was a monster and it was a mercy killing. Baldurin killed Ansur first, though. He liked being a Mind Flayer. He thought it was fun, I guess, and he only wished for acceptance. They had a messy breakup, to say the least. Again, the Emperor is seen as someone who was just trying to survive. He insists that he only killed Ansur to protect himself. Ansur refused to see reason and only saw the monster where he once had a partner. I cannot hold that against the Emperor, especially when I am bending over backwards to justify Astarion's wrongdoings. But it does establish a pattern of behavior for the Emperor. From here on out, the Emperor more or less ran things behind the scenes, feeding only on criminals and those who would not be missed. He worked closely with Duke Stelmane as well, and considered her a close friend, or maybe a partner of sorts, it's a little unclear. And he continues to live this way until Gortash finds out about him, and basically brings him back under the thrall of the Absolute. And I've heard people say that the Emperor is actually like the Mind Flayer that abducted you and your companions, and it wasn't until he abducted Shadowheart and came in close to the Astral Prism that he regained his freedom once more, and thus started the events of the game. Hi, Editing Mel here. The Netherbrain pretty much confirms this. I just finished the game for the third time last night after I recorded this video. That is basically confirmed. But while the Emperor may have had his freedom and his ability to think for himself and be his own person more or less, through dialogue with Will or the Emperor directly if you're mean to him, we learned that Duke Stelmane did not have the ideal partnership with him. She wasn't herself before her murder. The people of Baldur's Gate said she suffered from a stroke, and that explained the change in presence and behavior. although Will speculates it wasn't just merely a stroke that did that to her. However, the Emperor reveals that he was controlling her, utilizing his power as a mind flayer to manipulate those around him and stripping Duke Stelmane of her free will. It's not said for certain if he felt anything towards Duke Stelmane. When exploring his hideout underneath the Elfsong Tavern, the Emperor will share snippets of his life with you as you go through his items. His gear, his living conditions, his favorite soup recipe, a picture of Stelmane. He speaks about her with fondness, but I can't help assume that his fondness for her is the same as his fondness for us. At some point in early Act 3, you awaken one night in the astral realm with the Emperor at your side. He's seemingly upset, very melancholy in a way. You can ask about his past and his past partnerships, as it seems he was feeling some sort of grief for them. You can offer support or treat him like a monster. Either way, he shares vulnerability, but you do get farther if you play along and treat him like a person. You can offer comfort, and that's falling right into his plans. The Emperor has seemingly stripped bare his heart here, laying out emotion and vulnerability to you. But there's no way to tell if it's genuine. Sure, it could be. He could genuinely be feeling remorse for what he did, or maybe even feeling sad that his previous partners are gone. Or it could be the Emperor attempting to strengthen the bond between the two of you so that you are easier to manipulate. If you meet him with hostility or distrust here, he continues to put emphasis on how the two of you are so much alike. If you think he's a monster, then what does that make you? He shares how much he needs you, how much he needed allies, and what Duke Stelmane did for him. He talks about his past with her, but not to the full extent. It's very much if you meet him with hostility and he tries to relate to you, if you're really thinking about it, it almost feels like he's trying to convince you that you are just as bad as him, or as bad as you consider him to be. Or he's trying to appeal to your sympathy. He's just like you. He's a victim in need of help, just like you. Regardless of how you interact with the Emperor here, shortly after exploring his hideout, he will come to you in your sleep with plans to seduce you. He's here to raise you up. And I do want to say, the Emperor has been flirting with us in the past, especially when he was disguised as our Dream Guardian. I mean, look at the way the Dream Guardian is looking at me here. If that's not flirting and trying to raise me up, then I just don't know what romance is. If you had previously treated him with hostility, he'll say that he no longer holds any secrets with you, and that there's no need for subterfuge. The two of you are now true allies. He's laid everything bare. He claims that your distrust of him will be their downfall, your downfall, his downfall, offering to show you his thoughts in order to ease your discomfort. This is where he reveals the full extent as to how he controlled Stelmane. But it's presented as a, look, this could have been you. Aren't you glad I got new methods of manipulation now? He puts pressure on you, emphasizing that he could have treated you worse. Yeah, he didn't treat you great, but it could have been worse. He could have taken away your free will, your ability to think your own thoughts. He could have controlled you more directly, making you a more traditional thrall. He emphasizes how you're still his puppet. You're still his thrall, even if it's not in the traditional I'm taking over your consciousness way. And you will do as he desires, because you have no other choice. You will take him to the brain and do exactly as he says, because he controls you. Maybe not literally in the way that he controlled Stelmane, but the goal of manipulation and emotional abuse and exploitation that comes along with being manipulated is to control the victim. The Emperor uses the threat of force to convince you to transform, opening yourself up to the astral tadpole. You'll do well to reconsider, because if you don't, he will force you. Yes, this could have all been an act of intimidation coming off of a really bad rejection, his feelings hurt more or less, and maybe I did deserve the hostility for denying him his personhood and calling him a freak. But even then, it's still weird and gross of him. especially since there is evidence that he is telling the truth about how he treated Stelmane. There's no lies here. Some see this as the mask coming off and him revealing his true colors, showing the twisted monster that he's become. It's kind of open to interpretation here if you want to see it as the true monster underneath revealed, or a ego bruise in his feelings reaction. But either way, I think both interpretations show a manipulative freak underneath. However, if you do play along and sleep with the Emperor, it plays out in a way that I think is really worth dissecting. Not the actual intimacy, because that's just fan service for people who are into monsters, and more power to you. I've done it. I think if it wasn't the Emperor, it would have been more fun to play through. But I digress. The Emperor shares that he felt the two of you were growing quite close, and that he felt a connection with you. The two of you engage in intimacy, and afterwards the narrator convinces you that that's the best experience you've ever had in your life. The only other time the narrator has to confirm that you had a good time was when you sleep with Mizora. But that's kind of more like that was so good and you're never gonna get it again. And also, like, maybe I'm dumb, but the Mizora sex scene was like a little confusing. But with the Emperor, I've seen people interpret this as him manipulating your impression of the experience, telling you that you had the best time of your life and that's final, because you really didn't, but he's gonna make you believe that you did. This isn't really something with a lot of evidence, but it's worth thinking about. It's definitely plausible. However, I do think that the narrator telling you had a good time was more in service for people who are into this kind of thing. It was fan service for the monster fuckers out there. More power to you. I'm so happy for you. Genuinely. But the thing that I find the most interesting about romancing the Emperor is if you hadn't opened up your brain to the astral tadpole yet and transformed into a partial Ilithid, the Emperor will leverage your experience with him against you. He'll try to convince you once more to transform, to give up your attachment to your current form. He literally says, "You've seen what this body could do." Like, having a good time sleeping with him is good enough reason to give up your physical form and turn into a mind flayer. What is this man on? I know he enjoys being a squid boy, but that doesn't mean I should want to be one too. This whole exchange kind of ruins the experience for me here. It feels like the only reason he slept with the player was to convince them to transform, convince them to join him in being Ilithid. And that would fall in line with his past behavior as well. The way he's pushed for you to embrace the Ilithid power, the way he felt that living as a mind flayer was better than a merciful death. The Emperor is looking to turn others into mind flayers just like him, looking for others to join him. Yes, I'm aware everything I just said is a moot point if you had already become partial Ilithid and decide to sleep with him. I have not gotten this far in a playthrough where that's the decision that makes sense for my character, so maybe I'll eat these words in the future, but it's a very relevant reading for if you hadn't consumed the astral tadpole. I'm very curious to see how things change if you have consumed the astral tadpole, but I have a feeling that maybe it doesn't change all that much. Who knows? I don't know what he tries to convince you to do if he's not convincing you to become an Ilithid. There are also other instances where the Emperor acts more like a pushy, controlling partner. For instance, when meeting with Raphael, the devil is able to shield you from the Emperor's prying ears for a moment, where the two of you can discuss making a deal for the Orphic Hammer, which will allow you to break Orpheus free, no longer being held captive and used against his will. After leaving that interaction, the Emperor pops back up into your thoughts, explaining that he noticed your disappearance, demanding to know what happened. You can be upfront with him, and he'll continue to tell you how freeing Orpheus is dangerous and something you absolutely should not do. But if you're able to trick him into believing you have no idea what happened, he grows concerned. His hold on you is weakening as you get closer to the Elder Brain. At least that's his assumption, and he's genuinely disturbed by this. Again, it could be a disturbance of my power is waning, and that's scary, or a disturbance in his ability to, I guess, watch you 24/7, which is a little weird. It's so weird that he does that. Outside of cutscenes, interactions with the Emperor are pretty limited, and in order to get more interactions from him, you pretty much have to oppose him. He has a lot of interjections trying to stop you from breaking into the House of Hope to steal the hammer for yourself, saying it's a waste of time and a needless risk. And sure, maybe it is, but I'm going to make my own decisions, and I'm pretty cocky. And once you succeed in doing this and slaying a devil in his own home, the Emperor is like, "Ooh, I bet you think you're strong and clever, but you are dumb, and you shouldn't have done that, and you need to work with me here." And he's very angry about it. It's like, okay, bud. Okay. I mean, I understand, because he does genuinely believe that freeing Orpheus is against his best interest. And yeah, it's scary for your only allies to work against your interests, even if you're not a manipulative freak with very self-serving interests. If you do free Orpheus, though, there is one final confrontation with the Emperor, in which he decides that his survival is better guaranteed if he just suddenly switches sides. To hell with you and your plans, he'll just work with the Absolute, because at least then, he would still be alive. Yeah, until I kill him later. But it is an interesting and dramatic swap-up, especially if you'd believed that he really was on your side and really trying to stop the Absolute in gaining his freedom. Above all else, though, the Emperor values his life. His freedom and quality of life do not matter to him as long as he is still alive, which is a far cry from how most people approach this game. A part of me thinks that this swap-up is to show that the Emperor was not as noble and trustworthy as he claimed to be. A payoff on not trusting him, showing that if he felt it would better suit him, he would betray you in an instance. And it's especially interesting once you find out that you do need someone to be a mind flayer in order to subdue the Netherbrain and win this fight. I mean, the Emperor had already been telling you that you need to become partial Ilithid to win the fight, so like, why would he not continue to work with us if he really wanted his freedom and to do the right thing? The Emperor could have been a part of all of this. He's already a mind flayer and he likes being one, so no one's gonna need to make the sacrifice here. It'd be the perfect good ending and the perfect redemption for him specifically. To his credit, though, he did believe that Orpheus would not work with us and would kill him, and us as well. So I understand his unwillingness to see it through and give this option a shot, but it still would have been worth it, in my opinion. Me personally, I'd much rather die trying to fight for my freedom than swap to the side that would guarantee that I lose that freedom, which is essentially what the Emperor did. The Emperor plays a very interesting role in the game in the sense that he is the player's emotional baggage. He's the player's trauma, more or less. Every other companion character has an abuser, and a story arc that relates back to the themes of cycles of abuse. But since the game cannot guarantee that we're all making traumatized OCs, the game provides the player character the experience of being manipulated and used free of charge. It comes free with the Baldur's Gate 3 game. The Emperor pushes our boundaries and leads us to what he wants us to do. He uses kind words and sex appeal to lure us into a sense of safety and understanding. A sense of safety and understanding that's not real. Like many of the other companions, your arc with the Emperor also taps into that greed for power. You can give up aspects of yourself in exchange for more Ilithid power, sacrificing parts of your brain to your tadpole and consuming others. The Emperor also pushes you to partially transform, becoming part Ilithid in order to gain more power to achieve your shared goals, pushing you to give yourself up all for the sake of power. Power that he is presenting as necessary for your survival, as necessary to keep fighting for what you're doing. And it's not all that different from the desire and greed of power that Astarion feels when wanting to ascend. He genuinely believes that if he ascends, he'll never be a victim again. And that mirrors you and the Emperor. You'll never have to worry about the Absolute if you take on this power, sacrifice yourself, and become strong enough to get rid of the absolute. Never mind the fact that you're becoming the thing you've been fighting so hard not to be. This is just so wild, considering this whole game, this whole story, it started with you wanting to get rid of the tadpole in your brain. So make it make sense that in order to get rid of it, I should indulge in it and consume more. The Emperor's main form of manipulation when it comes to utilizing the Ilithid powers and transforming is one that I also find particularly insidious and incredibly subtle if you don't know what to look for. It's a form of manipulation that, on the surface, places all the responsibility and blame on you, the victim here. The Emperor presents himself as someone who is understanding and patient with you, but he does not take no for an answer. If you say no to transforming, sure, he'll lay off of it and talk about how you're not ready, aren't ready to transform, it's not something you're comfortable doing, but he can change that. Not that he directly says it, but that's the intent. In a way, it feels like coercion. The player has already given him an answer, but it's not the one he wanted, so he's going to keep pushing, breaking down your boundaries until he can convince you to become part of Ilithid. Every no is met with the idea that, oh, you'll come around eventually, you'll see sense, and understand that you should change your mind. In fact, the world depends on it. The Emperor plays with our trust in order to gain our help. Yes, at the end of the day, he is just trying to survive, and that does not make him a bad person. Because we are all just trying to survive. But it's his methods that I feel make him a bad person. While I do believe there is truth in his words, the Emperor often lies through omission, leaving out details that are honestly pretty huge, not sharing the full picture, only giving us what we need to know to be on his side. For the most part, what he says is true, but there's more to the story. He proudly states that he has never lied to you aside from pretending to be your dream guardian. And yes, all of what he says is technically true, but it's still not representative of the truth. If I said that this wall behind me is not pink, that is technically true, but that still tells you nothing about what the wall is actually like. And because this needs to be said, something about Baldur's Gate fandom, and honestly it's probably just like people at large, you are not a bad person for enjoying the Emperor's character. He's very well written, and sometimes a bad guy is just fun to play around with. You're allowed to like bad guys, and I'm not saying that you're bad because you like the Emperor. I definitely understand. A lot of my favorite characters are pretty terrible people. But that's not a reflection of our morality, and I can definitely see the appeal to enjoying the Emperor's character. Now that disclaimer is out of the way, to answer the question I proposed at the beginning of this video, yes, the Emperor really is that bad, at least to me. Thank you guys so much for watching me ramble about the Emperor for, I don't know, like an hour. I just really wanted to like go through and dissect his behavior and make sense of it all. I've not been able to stop thinking about him and just the way he manipulates your characters ever since I first finished the game back in November. So, this video has kind of been a long time coming. Anyway, that's it for me. I don't need to keep talking about the squid freak any longer.